Why is it that shiny Pokemon, well, shine? Shiny Pokemon are one of the rarest occurrences in the Pokemon games. 1 in 8,192 chance, or 1 in 4,096 for newer generations to find the shiny specimens. Many people have spent countless hours playing Pokemon without ever finding one of these, making these sought-after creatures very valuable for Pokemon fans. In this Iceberg, we'll explore the most interesting facts, mysteries, impossible-to-believe stories, and controversies of this shiny alternate-colored Pokemon. Welcome to the Shiny Pokemon Iceberg.
Say my name, EisenBerg. You're goddamn right.
Why do shiny Pokemon shine? Have you ever wondered why is it that these Pokemon not only are of a different color, but also shine when entering the battlefield? If you consider that Pokemon Gold and Silver were also compatible with the Game Boy, you'll know why. Due to it being monochromatic, there was no way to know if the Pokemon you were facing was shiny or not. Therefore, the players would need a visual cue to know that they found a rare Pokemon, hence the reason why Pokemon are shiny. But why do they keep doing the same if now everything is in color? Well, because it looks nice and because they're now called shiny Pokemon. Red Gyarados. The Red Gyarados at the Lake of Rage in the Johto region is the most common shiny Pokemon in existence, as people who played the Gen 2 games and the remakes got their hands on this shiny Gyarados. Personally, I didn't understand back then that any Pokemon could be shiny, and I thought that this Pokemon was made only as a reference to the Red Gyarados in the anime. That is technically not a shiny Pokemon, but a Magikarp that was forced to evolve before it could. Soft resetting. This is one of the most utilized techniques to find shiny Pokemon, and it refers to restarting your game without having to physically turn off your console, and instead use a combination of buttons to start from the beginning. This is obviously done to have another chance to find a shiny Pokemon. Run away. This is similar to soft resetting in the sense that you get another chance at facing a Pokemon. This is done when the game gives you a chance to find a static Pokemon, even after having run away from it. It is faster than soft resetting, but also extremely important in Pokemon Emerald, given the way RNG works, but we'll see more on that later. Masuda method. This is probably one of the most frequently used methods to hatch shiny Pokemon. As many of you know, this method was named after Junichi Masuda, who described this method in his blog back in 2007. Basically, it increases the chances of shiny Pokemon being produced when breeding with Pokemon with different languages of origin. This is one of the most popular and effective methods, not only to get a shiny Pokemon, but a shiny and competitive one. Shiny Charm. 1 in 8,192, also known as full odds, was the chance of finding a shiny Pokemon from Generation 1 until 5. But this very generation of games gave the players the opportunity to get the shiny charm to find shinies easier. The problem is that in order to get this item, the player must catch all Pokemon with the exception of mythical ones, meaning catching 636 Pokemon. Not an easy task at all. This charm doubles the chances of encountering shiny Pokemon, meaning the player has a 1 in 4,096 chance in Generation 5. From Generation 6 onward, given that the standard chance of finding a shiny Pokemon is 1 in 4,096, the shiny charm makes this chance 1 in 1,365. Indistinguishable shiny Pokemon. There exist a couple of Pokemon that are infamous for being almost indistinguishable from their normal counterparts. Examples of this are as follows. Shiny Pokemon real-life inspiration. There might be more species, but one of the clearest examples that inspired the shiny Pokemon mechanics is lobsters. These animals are iconic for their red color, but in extremely rare occasions, people have found blue lobsters, and the chance of finding one with this genetic mutation is 1 in 2 million, even rarer than a shiny Pokemon. Odd egg. One of the best chances at getting a shiny Pokemon happened back in Pokemon Crystal through a mobile system GB event, in which the player receives an egg that contains one of the back then new Pokemon babies. The chances of getting a shiny Pokemon through this egg in the Japanese version of Pokemon Crystal was 50%, basically a coin flip, and the best chances of getting a shiny Pokemon in the history of the franchise, not taking into consideration guaranteed shinies such as the Red Gyarados. Full odds shiny hunting. From Generation 6 onward, players got double the chances of finding a shiny Pokemon, but before that, 1 in 8,192 were the odds of finding one without any methods or items. However, within the shiny hunting concept, there's a type called full odds shiny hunting, and it refers to all those players that are looking for Pokemon without the intervention of anything that makes their hunt easier. If you want to find as many shiny Pokemon as possible, this is definitely not the way to go. But why do people put themselves in this kind of situations? Well, it might be because of the same reason why people do Nuzlocke challenges. They want to experience the satisfaction of achieving a goal through difficulty and making the end result more enjoyable and personally valuable. Shiny locked Pokemon. This fan-made term refers to those Pokemon that are impossible to encounter in their shiny form under normal circumstances, even if they're programmed into the game. This practice started with Pokemon Black and White, in which Reshiram and Zekrom, for example, were completely unobtainable as shiny. Although I don't think it's ever been said, I think this measure prevents players from enjoying the game and getting stuck in the middle of their adventures just because they're constantly soft resetting for shiny Pokemon. Not only was this measure implemented with legendaries, but also with starter Pokemon, as this would also prevent the players from starting their adventures. Shiny locked Pokemon is not a synonym of unobtainable shiny Pokemon, as some shiny Pokemon are locked in one game, but completely obtainable in others. Unobtainable shiny Pokemon. Unobtainable shiny Pokemon refers to those Pokemon that, even though they exist in the game's code, they have never been officially released. As far as I know, there are 35 Pokemon that haven't been released yet, one of them being Victini, a Pokemon that was revealed 14 years ago. I would think that every single Pokemon will be available as a shiny at some point, but how long this is gonna take is anyone's guess. Shiny fail. One of the most heartbreaking moments for anyone is when you find a shiny Pokemon, and fate ordains that it is not yours to keep. In all my years playing Pokemon, I failed to catch 4 shiny Pokemon. A shiny Wobbuffet that escaped in the Safari Zone in Sapphire, a shiny Latios in Ultra Sun I accidentally killed because I was playing the game in Italian and couldn't tell the difference between Thunderwave and Thunderbolt, a Mewtwo in the same game that just didn't want to get into the Pokeballs, and a shiny Swalot in Pokemon Emerald that showed up at the Battle Tower, meaning an uncatchable Pokemon. That's the thing about failing to catch a shiny Pokemon, that it's a pain you don't easily forget. Here are some people who have experienced the same.
Oh my god! No! Oh my god!
Oh no! No way! No way. That was it. That was the shiny. Almost a year of hunting. I just suffered over it.
Guaranteed shinies. For those who have never seen a shiny Pokemon, there are some that you can get. Here's a list of Pokemon that are guaranteed to be shiny. Shiny Pokemon are more powerful. Considering that shiny Pokemon are special, it was only natural to expect that not only their appearance would be different, but also its stats regarding ordinary Pokemon. This is true, but only for Pokemon in Generation 1 and 2. This is because Pokemon's shininess is determined by their IVs, and shiny Pokemon's IVs are considered slightly above average, as their speed, defense, and special had to be 10, and a Pokemon's highest limit was 15. However, from Generation 3 onward, shininess is no longer related to a Pokemon's IVs. Shiny Pokémon in Super Smash Bros. You might think that if this is on the Iceberg, it means that there is a chance of finding a shiny Pokémon in a Pokéball in any of the Super Smash Bros. Games, but this is not the case. What happens is that many of the alternative colors for Pokémon that can be chosen as fighters in the series reference their shiny forms, such as Mewtwo in Super Smash Bros. Melee, where a Mewtwo with a green tail can be selected. Shiny Pokémon in the anime. Ash Ketchum was the very first character in the anime to see and catch a shiny Pokémon. Shortly after, we would get to see the iconic Red Gyarados, which in the anime context is not really a shiny Pokémon, and more like a victim of Team Rocket's experiments. This list is actually quite long to cover here, but you can go to Bulbapedia and check all the shiny Pokémon in the anime. Shiny Pokémon in Pokémon Stadium 2. Shiny Pokémon are not always consistent between games or generations, and Pokémon Stadium 2 is proof of that. Pokémon such as Porygon 2 have a different coloration in their shiny form, but to me, one of the most radical changes that I wish were still present in future games is that of Scyther, which is similar to its Gen 2 evolution, as it is almost completely red. Shiny Pokémon in Pokémon Coliseum. If you saw my Pokémon Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald Iceberg, you might be familiar with this entry. Shiny Pokémon in Pokémon Coliseum can be extremely different in comparison to their 2D sprites counterparts. Here are some examples. Shiny Pokémon in Challenge Cup. If you thought that Pokémon Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald were the first games in which NPCs could have shiny Pokémon such as those in the Battle Tower, the reality is that this title belongs to Pokémon Stadium 2. The Challenge Cup is a tournament in which random Pokémon will be selected by players, but the first recorded instance of a shiny Pokémon being sent to battle was in a stream by speedrunner Worster. Here's the clip.
This guy has a shiny. That was a legit shiny.
First encounter shiny Pokémon. If you think all shiny hunters spend at least hours or days looking for a shiny Pokémon, some of them are incredibly lucky and find their target in the first encounter. Here's an example.
Yes! First try we found the Articuno! Oh! No way! No way! That's a shiny! That's a shiny in the first encounter!
Back-to-back shiny Pokémon. I'm sure most people have played the games without ever finding a shiny Pokémon other than the guaranteed ones, but some others are blessed with so much luck that they found 2 shiny Pokémon in a row. No, 2 shiny Pokémon at the same time. Obviously the guy was playing 2 different games, but that's still a 1 in 67 million chance.
Are you serious? Wait, what the f? Holy sh! I've never seen that before! Oh my god! What the f just happened? Holy 2 shinies on stream!
If you want to know what impossible sounds like, let's say that the 2 Pokemon you find back to back are shiny Spinda, but with the twist that both have the same spot pattern. The possibility of finding 2 Spinda with the same spot pattern is 1 in around 4 billion, and if you make them shiny and with the same pattern, the odds are 1 in 1 octillion. Improved Shinies. Shinies like Greninja or Charizard are universally praised for their amazing shiny colors, but in the same way there are good, there are also bad ones, such as those that barely change or that there is something off with the color they're given. That's why some people have made videos trying to improve those colors, and some of them are actually very good. Shiny Zapdos is not shiny. If you saw my Pokemon Go Iceberg, you'll be familiar with the fact that at some point, Zapdos was introduced in Pokemon Go with its shiny colors, but without the sparkling effect, most likely because not even the game developers were able to tell the difference between shiny and non-shiny Zapdos, given their similarities. This of course was later fixed. Trainers with shiny Pokemon. Although not too many, there are some trainers in the games that have shiny Pokemon. The first examples that exclude battle facilities are those at the trainer tower in Fire Red and Leaf Green. And I know that it's also a battle facility, but I consider that battle facilities are those in which trainers and Pokemon are randomly generated, instead of those that are always fixed. The Pokemon in question are Meowth, Espeon, and Seeking. In the 7th generation games, there's a trainer with a shiny Execute. Shiny Ditto blocks. In the terrarium at the Blueberry Academy, there are a couple of Ditto blocks that you'll need to find to get some Blueberry points, but there's a 1 in 100 chance that the Ditto block will be shiny. You can't do anything with them, but it's a small reference to the shiny variant of Ditto. Breeding with shiny Pokemon in Generation 2. If you thought that the Masuda method was the best way to hatch shiny eggs, that's because you don't know about this technique. If you have a shiny Pokemon as one of the parents and it breeds with a regular one, the odds of the offspring being shiny is 1 in 64, one of the best odds ever. This was great if your shiny Pokemon belonged to an egg group with a lot of Pokemon, and if you had a shiny Ditto, then you would win the lottery. Shiny Ditto trick. This is one of the most useful glitches I've ever seen to get shiny Pokemon. If you wanna try it and transfer a lot of shiny Pokemon to the newest generation of games, you need the following. A Nintendo 3DS with a Virtual Console version of one of the first generation games, a second Nintendo 3DS, this time with Pokemon Gold, Silver or Crystal, Pokemon Bank so you can transfer all the shiny Pokemon you'll get to your new games on Switch. Now what you need to do. Catch the Red Gyarados and trade it from your 2nd gen game to your Red, Blue or Yellow in your other console. Teach that very Gyarados Mimic. Find a wild Ditto and use Mimic so that your Gyarados knows the move Transform. This will make the wild Ditto transform twice, the first one being its original move and the second one from the list of moves that Gyarados knows, being that the Mimic Transform. For some reason, this will make the wild Ditto copy the DVs of your Gyarados that, as you remember, is a shiny Pokemon. This means that Ditto will copy all the DVs from your shiny Pokemon, becoming shiny itself. Once you catch it, return it to your 2nd generation game and it will be a shiny Ditto. Why would this be useful? Because when breeding, if one of the parents is shiny, the offspring has a 1 in 64 chances of being a shiny, and since Ditto can breed with the vast majority of Pokemon, this means that you get the chance of obtaining almost all Pokemon from Gen 1 and 2 in their shiny form with this method. Although hatching a Pokemon in Gen 2 might be a slow process even with the bike, this method is one of the best to hunt for shiny Pokemon. And since these games are compatible with Pokemon Bank and Home, it might be your best chance at shiny hunting for around 240 Pokemon in the shortest time. Shiny roaming Pokemon. If this ever happened to you first try, you're one of the luckiest players. Examples of roaming Pokemon are the legendary Beasts and the Lati duo, Pokemon that can be randomly found in almost any part of a given region, but with the difference that once you find them, they'll always be of the same nature and IVs, meaning that if they escape and you find them again, you'll be facing the exact same Pokemon. This means that running away from it and finding it again won't be of any use if you're looking for a shiny, and if you save the game after the encounter, bad news, because you'll have to restart your adventure. There are ways to shiny hunt this Pokemon in a more efficient way, such as saving the game right before looking for the Pokemon, and when found, if they're not shiny, reset your game so that when you face the Pokemon again, its stats and nature are different, opening up the possibility for a shiny Pokemon. This of course means that you'll have to look for the Pokemon across the entire region, so even with Repel, this shiny hunt is one of the most time consuming. If you're looking for this Pokemon, it's better to hunt them where their encounters are static. Cute Charm Glitch. The cute charm glitch, as its name indicates, is an exploit used in order to get shiny Pokemon more often in Generation 4. This is done by manipulating the game to get specific trainer IDs and secret IDs, as well as using a Pokemon with the ability Cute Charm that outside of battle attracts Pokemon of the opposite gender. Somehow, by doing this, the possibility of finding a shiny Pokemon with this method is 22%. Shiny Pokemon in Pokemon Stadium. I know shiny Pokemon didn't exist in Generation 1 or Pokemon Stadium, but this game can make Pokemon have a different color depending on their nickname and the original trainer's trainer ID number and name. It's very common to see this Pokemon, as the vast majority of NPCs give them nicknames. This feature was also present in Pokemon Stadium 2, with the difference that shiny Pokemon will have their own unique color, and as far as I know, they're not affected by any nicknames they're given. Here are some examples. Crystal Onix. Another example of a non-shiny Pokemon that could well be shiny is the Crystal Onix that appeared in the 87th episode of the Pokemon anime. One of the most interesting features of this Pokemon is that, contrary to his regular counterpart, the Crystal Onix is immune to water, making it a different type other than rock and ground. This Crystal Onix made an appearance in a ROM hack of Pokemon Ruby called Pokemon Naranja, and it was a Steel Ice type. I wonder if anyone at Game Freak drew inspiration from this Pokemon to come up with the terrestrial phenomenon in Scarlet and Violet. Battle Facility Shinies. One of the unluckiest events that can ever happen to anyone in a Pokemon game is not being able to catch a shiny, such as the Battle Tower in Ruby and Sapphire. There's no way to catch this Pokemon without the use of cheating devices, leaving you with the choice of defeating them or being defeated by one of them. Inverted Shiny Smeargle. Smeargle is a Pokemon known for having paint on his tail. Nowadays the regular form's paint is green, but if we go back to the second generation of games, it's red. Coincidentally, a Smeargle with red paint is now the shiny form of this versatile Pokemon. Shiny hunting in Pokemon Emerald. Pokemon Emerald works completely different in terms of shiny Pokemon. While other games' frame count would continue even if you reset your game, Pokemon Emerald would always go back to frame 0. The problem with this is that if your Emerald save file is bound to encounter a shiny Pokemon in frame 10,000 and you always soft reset before that frame without knowing, you'll never find a shiny Pokemon because you're not even close to hitting that specific frame. This was a problem if you were trying to find a shiny Mew on Faraway Island, given that soft resetting would result in the problem I just talked about. To solve this problem, players would exit the area where Mew is instead of soft resetting, and in this way the frame count would keep going, giving the players the chance to hit one of the frames where a shiny Mew can appear. Pokemon Emerald's RNG is unique in the entire franchise, and you can find shiny Pokemon way easier than in other generations, provided that you have a specific set of tools. Shiny costumes in Battle Revolution. Shininess doesn't only apply to Pokemon, but can also apply to inanimate objects such as costumes, if that makes any sense. This happened in Pokemon Battle Revolution, where Coliseum leaders would have a shiny variation of their normal costumes. I think one of the most popular ones is the shiny Groudon costume, since I haven't been able to find another example. Shiny mechanics in Pokemon Coliseum. There was a popular misconception with Pokemon Coliseum's shiny Pokemon, and that was that if you purify them, they were at risk of losing their shininess due to their stats or nature changing. This is not the case, although there's something weird that happens with them. NPCs are programmed so that when they send a Pokemon into the battlefield, their shadow Pokemon are never shiny, leading to a serious problem for those unexperienced shiny hunters expecting the target Pokemon to shine. However, this doesn't mean that they are shiny locked, as after you catch them, the game will re-roll the Pokemon's data for a chance to be shiny. Once you get a shiny, it's safe to purify. Valencia Island's Pokemon. Valencia Island is located in the southwestern region of the Orange Archipelago. The Pokemon that live here are of a slightly different color, but what's more noticeable are their patterns, something that reminds me of the clone Pokemon in Mewtwo Strikes Back. Inconsistent shiny Pokemon in the core series games. While most shiny Pokemon have been consistent in their colors throughout the generations, there are some that have radically changed despite belonging to the core series games. One of the most widely known cases is Charizard, whose shiny form is black, but in Generation 2 this Pokemon was purple. Another case of a Pokemon looking different was that of Typhlosion, with its iconic flames being purple instead of orange. Shiny Pokemon are indistinguishable in the manga. Even if you have a monochromatic Game Boy, you would know the moment you see a shiny Pokemon by the star's animation. But what happens when you don't have the color or animation? Welcome to Pokemon Adventures. I want you to tell me which of the two Gyarados you're seeing on screen is a shiny Pokemon. If you chose the left one, then you're wrong. The only way of really knowing what kind of Pokemon you're seeing is just context. Maybe the title or the dialogue of the manga tells you whether the Pokemon you're seeing is shiny or not. NPCs shiny Pokemon. There's a plethora of NPCs that have the chance of having or encountering a shiny Pokemon. Here's the list. The Rattata that the dude catches in Pokemon Gold, Silver and Crystal. The Poochyena or Zigzagoon that attacks Professor Birch in Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald. The Zigzagoon that Wally uses in the capture tutorial. The Ralts that Wally catches, but only when he catches it and not in subsequent battles. The Weedle that the old man encounters in Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, rental Pokemon found in the Battle Factory in Pokemon Emerald, Battle Frontier Pokemon used by the AI in the same game, wild Pokemon that appear in the Battle Pike and Battle Pyramid, the Pokemon that the player uses in Battle CDs in Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, the Starly that attacks the player in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, as well as in the remakes, the Bidoof that Lucas or Don captures in the capture tutorial, Battle Frontier Pokemon used by the AI in Pokemon Heart Gold, Soul Silver and Platinum, Professor Juniper's Minccino that appears in the World of Pokemon intro, and the one used in the catching tutorial in Pokemon Black and White, Professor Juniper's Cinccino that appears in the World of Pokemon intro in Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, the Purloin that Bianca catches in the same games, the Excadrill used by Last Diana in her first battle in Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 if the player traded her a shiny Excadrill, the Hypodon used by the same character in her second battle if the player traded her a shiny Hypodon, the Fletchling that the rival Kalem or Serena uses in the capture tutorial in Pokemon X and Y, the Bunnelby that the same characters use in the capture tutorial, the Execute used by Sightseer Marcus in the 7th generation of Pokemon games, and Arven's Pokemon used in the battles against the Titan Pokemon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Transforming into a non-shiny Pokemon. What happens if you have a shiny Ditto and it transforms into a non-shiny opponent? In recent generations, a shiny Ditto trying to transform into a regular Pokemon will copy its regular colors. However, this wasn't the case in Generation 3, as a shiny Ditto will become the shiny version of the opponent, even if such opponent is not a shiny. If you had a shiny Ditto back then, it was a great way to see how other shinies looked without having to find them. Shiny Celebi in Generation 3. For those who dreamt about having a shiny living Dex back in Gen 3, let me warn you, as if it mattered now, that you're facing an impossible task if you want to play fair. Out of all 386 Pokemon available back then, there was only one that was completely impossible to obtain. Celebi. The reason for this is that there were only a couple of Celebi distributions across North America and Japan, including the 10th anniversary Celebi and the Celebi from the Japanese bonus disc of Pokemon Coliseum. There was no way to make this Pokemon shiny, although the only way to see how a shiny Celebi would look like is if you had a shiny Ditto that could transform into a Celebi, since Ditto retains its shininess even if the opposing Pokemon is a normal one. Transforming as a shiny Pokemon in Gen 2. There are only two Pokemon that can learn Transform, Ditto and Mew. Given that these two Pokemon are blue in their shiny form, when transforming into other Pokemon, their sprites would remain blue, regardless of what the color of the opponent is. I suppose that this is due to the game's limitations, as we are talking about a Game Boy Color game. Shiny Egg Disappointment. Imagine that one of your friends trades you a random egg and that once you hatch it, you see a shiny Pokemon. The excitement is high until you go to its status screen and realize it's a regular Pokemon. This could have happened to you in Generation 3, 4 and 5, because when an egg is generated, it is given the OT, ID, secret ID, and game identifier of the game which created it. This can cause an egg which is traded to hatch shiny, but be normal in reality. This is due to the change in OT, ID, and secret ID happening after the hatching cutscene. Double Shiny Freeze. There's a wild double battle when the player is with Cheryl in Eterna Forest. If the two wild Pokemon happen to be shiny, the game will freeze. The possibility of this happening is 1 in 67 million as far as I know. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any footage about this happening, but trust me on this one. Beta Shiny Gogoat. Although many of us are familiar with Shiny Gogoat, there was another version of Shiny Gogoat shown in pre-release footage, very different to what we ended up with. Unown and the Secret of Shininess. Shininess and IVs are strictly correlated in Generation 1 and 2, as this will always determine whether a Pokemon is shiny or not. If we thought that the Unown are mysterious creatures, apparently they also held the secret to these mechanics, as the only Unown that could be shiny are letters I and V. Although it seems that Game Freak was aware of what they were doing, this happens to be a complete coincidence, as the term IV is fan-made. Ultra Shiny Trademark. In 2008, a trademark for Ultra Shiny was filed by Game Freak. What is Ultra Shiny? It is believed that it might refer to shiny Pokemon that appear in Sword and Shield and that display squares instead of stars when sent into battle. However, what if this is not the case? Throughout the years and watching all these videos about how to improve shiny Pokemon, I realized that it might be a good idea if Game Freak decided to implement different levels of rarity in shiny Pokemon. For example, we would have the shiny Pokemon we all know as the most common type, while, let's call them super shiny Pokemon, would have a different color and a chance of 1 in 65,000 to appear. Ultra Shinies would be some sort of holy grail for shiny hunters, with a unique color, but this time being as rare as 1 in 1 million. Back in 1993, Street Fighter 2 had 8 palettes for each fighter, so I don't think it would be a great sacrifice for Game Freak to implement more colors for different types of shiny Pokemon. Let me know in the comments what you think about this idea. Shiny Pokemon in Generation 1. Shiny Pokemon didn't exist until Pokemon Gold, Silver and Crystal, but this didn't prevent Pokemon from Red, Blue and Yellow to be shiny when transferred to the second generation games. In fact, Pokemon in Generation 1 whose DVs or IVs as we know them now are 10 in Speed, Defense and Special and 2, 3, 6, 7, 10, 11, 14 or 15 in Attack will be shiny in Generation 2. The way in which shiny hunters look for shinies in Generation 1 is by looking at Pokemon with these IVs through the Pokemon stats, but this only works with Pokemon above level 50, as IVs can be ambiguous if you try to calculate them through the stats of low-level Pokemon. The chance of encountering a shiny Pokemon in these games is the same as in the second one, 1 in 8,192. Shiny locked Pokemon in Generation 1. Pokemon with a specific set of IVs from Red, Blue and Yellow can be shiny if sent to Gold, Silver and Crystal. However, only Pokemon that can be obtained via static encounters, gifts, in-game trades and fishing can be shiny, leaving any Pokemon that can be found in tall grass, cave tiles or by surfing shiny locked. Differently colored Pokemon in the anime. Although not officially shiny Pokémon, there are a couple of examples in which Pokémon have had different colors from those of their regular and shiny counterparts. One of the first examples is a green Pidgey that appeared in the second episode of the anime, or a purple Kecleon. Another example of Pokémon with a different color is that of those on Pinken Island, Pokémon that would turn pink because of eating Pinken berries. There are other cases, such as a Weedle being of a green color, Ash's Lapras's mother being light blue, Snowman Snorlax, a blue Breloom, a gold Sudowoodo, a Mismagius color Rayquaza, a deeper blue Mareanie and Toxapex, and Ash's Gengar that has a light purple color. Specially colored Pokémon. There's a Nintendo-powered Pokémon strategy guide called Pokémon Gold and Silver Complete Pokédex, with a brief explanation on what shiny Pokémon are, although they were not referred to as shiny Pokémon yet, and instead named Specially Colored Pokémon. This is probably one of the earliest sources in which shiny Pokémon are mentioned in the West. Normal Gyarados at the Lake of Rage. In a parallel universe, shiny Pokémon are the most common and regular ones are met with surprise. This happened once when a player was hunting for a blue Gyarados at the Lake of Rage. As expected, this was an April Fool's joke, given that the games are programmed in a way that the Gyarados is always shiny. Many people fell for it, until someone with enough knowledge on the game gave an explanation. Shiny hunting is a degenerate act. Finding a shiny Pokémon is something that not everyone watching this has ever experienced, although some of you have found them by chance. But what about those who spend hours, days, weeks, or even months looking for them? Even Game Freak has prevented Pokémon such as the starters from being shiny to avoid that players get stuck for hours at the beginning of the game. But is it that bad? It all depends on who you ask. If you ask a casual player, they'll tell you that it might be a complete waste of time, while competitive players might think that they could invest those hours training Pokémon for tournaments and win real-life competitions and prizes. What do you think about shiny hunting? Longest shiny hunt ever. YouTuber Reversal documented his journey on one of the longest shiny hunts ever on YouTube. He began looking for a 1% encounter Feebas in Pokémon Sword and Shield. Hunting for this Pokémon was harder than any other given how rare it is, making it a 1 in 136,500 chance of finding it. This hunt took 4 years and 236,184 encounters. The hardest shiny Pokémon to hunt. Pokémon such as the Wishmaker Jirachi or Mew from Pokémon Emerald are considered among the hardest to get shiny Pokémon because the conditions you need to meet or the time you need to spend is too much. However, many will agree that the next Pokémon is unrivaled to this day. Shiny Manaphy is considered one of the rarest shiny Pokémon in existence because Game Freak never intended this mythical Pokémon to be obtained as shiny. So the only way to get a Manaphy back in Gen 4 was to have a Pokémon Ranger game, finish the game, enter a password, complete a mission to recover a Manaphy egg, and transfer the egg to Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum. We need to consider that this egg can only be obtained once per copy, meaning that even if you restart your game from zero, you won't be able to get another one. But the real problem is that even if you could get an infinite amount of eggs, these are automatically prevented from being shiny by using the trainer and secret ID numbers from your Gen 4 Core Series game. However, an oversight in Generation 4 allows a Manaphy egg to have a chance to hatch shiny, but only if it was traded before hatching. This is because shininess is dependent on the trainer ID and secret ID numbers, and the game mistakenly attempts to prevent shininess using the original game's ID numbers, instead of the ID numbers of the game that it was traded to. In case you want to attempt this, you would need to get the Pokémon Ranger egg, or as many of them as possible from different copies, transfer them to your copy of Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum, walk enough steps before they hatch and save the game. Once done, trade the eggs to another copy and hatch them there. If they're not shiny, reset, return the eggs to the original game, and start over your adventure in the second copy so that you get a new trainer and secret ID numbers, hoping that this time they'll generate a shiny Manaphy. Without a doubt, the hardest shiny hunt in the history of the franchise. Shiny Living Dex. If you've ever thought about what would be one of the greatest achievements in Pokemon, that would be to have a shiny living dex. For those unfamiliar with the term, a living dex refers to being in possession of every single Pokemon in existence, and not only having them registered in your Pokédex. A shiny living dex is that, but with shiny Pokemon. Has there ever been anyone who has achieved this unbelievable feat? The real answer is that it is completely impossible to the day this video was posted. The reason is that while all Pokemon have a shiny form, not all of them have been officially released. There are 35 Pokemon that are yet to be officially released in their shiny form, most of them being either legendary or mythical. But let's suppose for a moment that every single Pokemon is available to be found shiny. How long would it take to catch them all? Well, I'm planning on making a series of videos about this topic. All I can say is that you would probably need to be the luckiest person on Earth. Please let me know in the comments how many legit shiny Pokemon you have in your games. Beta Shiny Pokemon. The Pokemon Gold and Silver Space World 97 demo is an early build of the second generation of Pokemon games we're familiar with. These games already had shiny Pokemon coded in them, but with very different mechanics. First of all, the chance of finding a shiny Pokemon is around 2%, so not that rare in comparison to the final version. Also, due to technical limitations, shiny Pokemon couldn't have their own unique color. Instead, all Pokemon that, for example, were green, would turn gray and none of them would shine. The only Pokemon with a star animation are Pikachu and Sunflora. 2 shiny Pokemon can't breed. There's something extremely odd that happened in Pokemon Gold, Silver and Crystal that can prevent Pokemon from laying eggs, even if both parents belong to the same egg group. For some strange reason, if 2 Pokemon have identical IVs in their defense, they'll never be able to lay an egg. Coincidentally, 2 shiny Pokemon can only have identical IVs in their defense, resulting in 2 shiny Pokemon at the daycare never being able to lay an egg. However, one shiny parent will give us a 1 in 64 chance of the offspring being a shiny Pokemon. Mythical shiny Pokemon shouldn't exist. This is a very interesting thought, and I would like you to leave in the comment section how you would explain this occurrence. Out of thousands of Rattata or Pidgey, a very few will be shiny, but what happens when there's only a handful of specimens? How can we explain the existence of shiny Pokemon such as Mewtwo or Arceus? A theory regarding how Mewtwo can be shiny could be explained by considering that he was cloned from the DNA of a shiny Mew, taking into account that at some point, a vast population of Mew existed in the past, and that at least one was shiny. As far as I know, there are at least 2 Mew, the one from the first movie and another one from Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. But if in the past this Pokemon was as common as others, then it might be possible to give birth to a shiny Mewtwo from its DNA. However, other Pokemon that are bound to be unique, such as Arceus, are not supposed to be shiny unless we take into consideration the concept of omnipotence, given its state as a god. Another theory, and the simplest of all, is that shiny Arceus belongs to a universe in which the normal state of Pokemon is being what we consider shiny. As always, thank you so much for your support. Don't forget to subscribe, comment and like my video. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.